Best for last. We did this on purpose. We put Mark and David last because this is the most fun you're going to have and the most you're going to learn in an hour and 15 minutes. Mark has promised to keep his language down to PG. We are going to have questions, and they're actually going to...
PGA.
What was that? We're also going to have questions by microphone. The reason why I'm not moderating is he shows absolutely no respect for me, so we wouldn't get anything said. But he does show respect for the man I'm going to introduce in 1 second. But first, please let me tell a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a cell phone on by now, and you're talking in front of Mark Gordon and David Picker,
turn it up.
He doesn't mean that. Turn it off. Please show respect to them and turn off your cell phones.
That's right.
And he actually doesn't care if you have recording devices because he'll probably break them anyway. I also want to say, please, that we actually have a sponsor for this session and someone who Mark Gordon does a lot of business with. Technicolor is a sponsor of this session. Is Michael Moncrief here? Is Michael Moncrief here? No? Well, on behalf of Michael Moncrief,
paid, but they didn't show.
And Technicolor, they're very happy to sponsor this session because Mark happens to use Technicolor for a lot of his TV shows, so he pays them a lot of money. Trying to find someone to moderate Mark Gordon was extremely difficult. Everyone turned the job down. It is impossible to try to shine as bright as he does and have the kind of success he does and the kind of hits he's now having. The only man I could find that could rise to the occasion, it's mainly because he's 6'10".
How tall are you, David?
Legendary producer. He also ran UA Studios during the heydays of UA Studios. He is a wonderful man, a wonderful member of the Guild. He really brought our PGA East to its prominence. We have over 1,100 members of PGA East. And a lot of them are due to the fact of this brilliant producer and a great raconteur. David, I'm so proud you're here, and thank you so much for doing this. It means a lot to us.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. A couple of things. Walter Chrysler said if you want something done, you give it to a busy man. That's good. A busy man is sitting right next to me. I wanted to say something about him personally before we started. And I know he wants me to keep it short, so I came up with 2 words, which I think capsulize this extraordinary friend. Irreverent and irresistible.
Thank you.
We met in 1992 when he was nowhere near as busy as he is now, but he was busy enough so that he had somehow convinced, because he's a great salesman, convinced Samuel Goldwyn Jr. to do a movie called Traces of Red. A kind of a nice little...
What was the original title? Do you remember?
No, I barely had to look up the title of Traces of Red. But it's...
Yeah, it wasn't a great moment in either of our careers.
No, and I couldn't figure out why Sam agreed to make the movie, but nonetheless he did.
Tom Rothman.
Was it Rothman working with Sam? That's right.
Yeah.
And Mark was already moving on in his career, so they needed some out-of-work producer to take it over. And so they asked me to take over Traces of Red, and I became the producer of it with Mark. And it was great, actually, because I managed to spend 6 weeks in Palm Beach, Florida. I mean, that ain't so bad. And the movie is long, long forgotten. But
for good reason.
But Mark, you know, it's almost hard to... I'm going to have to let him do it. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions. I worked for a brilliant, crazy person named Robert Halmy, who makes mega TV series, and he was an extraordinary man in many ways. And he looked at me one day and he says, you know, the trouble with you is you're a buyer and you're not a seller, which is kind of true because most of my career I've financed films as opposed to making them. But Mark is both. And I wonder, Mark, if you could tell us about your career and, in a sense, what attracted to you and what is it that you get the most pleasure from convincing somebody to do something that you believe in or making the show that you convince somebody to believe in?
The check. Just kidding. You know, I've always thought of myself primarily as a seller. Many years ago, I was feeling sorry for myself because as a producer, you always have your hand out to someone. You need the agent to give you the script. You need the studio to give you the money. You need some independent financier or some gap financier to give you the money. And I felt like, you know, what a loser. I need everybody to do what I do, otherwise I can't do it. And somehow what came to me was, you know what? To quote Hyman Roth in The Godfather Part 2, this is the life I've chosen. This is what I do. It doesn't mean that I'm less than. It doesn't mean that I'm not as good at what I do or not as good as the rest of the people who do what they do. It just means that it's harder for me and harder for many of you to be able to do what we do because we need so much from so many people. But there also is something gratifying about the fact that you can take something from here and take something from here and take something from here and sort of mash it all together, if you will. And sometimes you end up with a good movie and sometimes you end up with just a movie or a television show that at least you feel good about the fact that you get it made. Particularly when I was making fewer things at the same time, I would sit in the audience after a film that I had made was finished, and I would literally almost cry because, as we all know, how you end up getting this thing up on the screen, even if it's crap, I mean, even if it's not a very good film, you just sort of look and you go, I must have been somehow sleeping when all of this happened because I can't remember the pain and suffering that I went through to get to this place of joy. So I think that for me, there is certainly a thrill in making something happen, and I think that early on in my career, there was more of a thrill because, frankly, it was harder and it was few and far between as far as the things that I was able to get going. I have always been driven by the material. And from the beginning of my career, I always wanted to make the things that I wanted to make, which is probably why I chose the route of not going up the corporate ladder. I never worked for another producer. I never worked at a studio. I never worked as an agent. I came out to L.A. and after a couple of years went back, produced a play off Broadway, which was a terrible flop, and I felt that my career had ended at 24, and I was a failure, and it was over for me. But from that point forward, I just kept producing and starving and, you know, eventually was able to make things. But I just wanted to do it. I didn't want to help other people do it as an agent or an executive. I just wanted to do it for me. So the content is always the thing that drives me.
That's great. I've sat through several of the sessions in the last 2 days, and you people in the room all would really love to hear the specifics of something. I've heard a lot of generalities, but I think it would be great, Mark, if you could just take a few minutes on any one of the projects that you've been involved in, whether it's a TV series or a film, and take our friends out here through the process in more specific terms. Because I think that, you know, yes, you got to knock down every door. Yes, you can't give up. Yes, you got to believe. We've heard that, we know it, and we believe it. But what we also want to know is what's the process? What do you have to do? So could you pick anything you want and give us some insight on it? Thank you.
First film that I made that was a real success was Speed. I was 37 years old or 36 years old. I had been working for a long time, desperate to get into that hit club, hadn't gotten there yet. We read the script. I was actually on my way, as David was in Florida doing Traces of Red, I was on my way to Prague and on my way to make a picture called Swing Kids, which I made many years ago. And on the plane, I read this script called Speed. And the first section of it, the elevator part of the film, which many of you have seen, I certainly hope, was exactly what you ended up seeing on the screen. The rest of it was different. There was no subway sequence. We stayed on the bus the entire rest of the movie. It turns out that the character that Dennis Hopper played was actually really dead, had died as they had thought, and Harry, the character that Jeff Daniels played, was using him as a ruse to orchestrate the fact that because he was angry about being passed over for promotion, he was actually the bad guy. Very different. It took a year to get somebody to buy this and make the deal. Literally a year. We developed the script at Paramount, who bought it, paid the writer, scale plus 10, Graham Yost, who's gone on to do, we've done a couple of other pictures together, and he's also gone on to write some pretty terrific television and produce television. After a couple of years in development, they decided to put it in turnaround. We took it out. I took it to Fox and had a verbal agreement to get them to develop the script from there. Just as we were waiting for the paperwork to come through, I got a call from an executive at Paramount, a high-level executive, who said, you know, I know we put your project into turnaround, but evidently what had happened was that they had put a stack of scripts on Sherry Lansing, who was the chairman, just become the chairman, on her desk, and she came back and said, everything I've read is crap except for this script, Speed. And this executive had to say, well, we don't own it anymore. And so he was desperate to get me to bring it back to them. And I was kind of flattered and excited, but also I had made an agreement to make a deal at Fox. And they offered me a lot of money to bring the project back to Paramount. I mean, a lot of money, and I really needed it. And I was really kind of troubled. You know, on the one hand, you say to yourself, well, am I a man of my word and I've agreed to do this movie at Fox? Or am I going to do what presumably we think that everybody else does, which is to say, everybody's looking out for themselves. Why shouldn't I? I need the money. Do I really think that the people at Fox would care about me if they made an obligation to me? And would they honor that? No, presumably, because, gee, that's not really how the world works. And I was really genuinely torn. And I decided to go with Fox, who gave me the standard development deal at the time, which was $12,500, instead of what I remember was $500,000. And it's funny, what went through my mind was, this is the right thing to do. And frankly, on the more practical side, what we know is that everybody knows everything, and people from here go to there, go to there, go to there. And I don't even, you know how when you're kids, you stay out of school one day and you're thinking, everybody knows I'm not in school, as if anybody cares. I don't know that I really believed that it would matter, because I think it would have just been one more thing. But I just felt that I had made an agreement, and I didn't want to be that person. So we went to Fox, and we did a couple of drafts, and they decided to make the movie. And let's just say that we had offered the movie to everyone before we got Keanu. And I wasn't sure about him. He had done a couple of small pictures. Sandy Bullock had done one movie. I think it was Demolition Man. No one had really seen her before. You know, the cast that we were desperate to have was Billy Baldwin and Halle Berry. Now, how different would that movie have been? So, you know, you can see what a genius I am. But also, Dennis Hopper was the 97th choice. Jan and I wanted Randy Quaid to play the bad guy, and the studio felt that because he had been doing all those National Lampoon movies that everybody would think. Anyway, Jan de Bont could not get arrested, had to bring him into the studio 3 times, and the only reason that he ended up getting the job was because the other director that Fox was high on wanted to shoot the entire thing on the bus, on a stage, with green screen. That would have been a really exciting picture, too. So you can see that my success is all about me and all the choices that I've made, which I would argue is probably true with most of the people. Yes, over a period of time, you have to make some smart choices, but so much of one's good fortune is, you know, the stars aligning, and we did everything we could to unalign the stars. We made the movie. The first time I saw the film, I was appalled, and I thought to myself, Dennis Hopper is so over the top. How do we cut him out of the picture? I mean, honestly, it was not something that any of us felt before we showed it to the studio that the picture would work. I was also told by Paramount that I would never work there again, and the next story I'm going to briefly tell you is about Saving Private Ryan, which I made a couple years later for Paramount. But we opened up we previewed the picture. We were told that we were going to go in the summer. We were going to move it up against City Slickers 2, which we were terrified of because the first one had been so successful. And the movie became a big hit, and all of a sudden there was a day, literally, where the day before I couldn't get anybody on the phone, and the next day I had everyone calling me. And it wasn't because I was that much smarter, and it wasn't because I was better at what I did, but that thing, that hit, changed my life. So that's one story.
That's good.
Shall I wait for another question, David?
Sure.
You're the boss.
Okay.
I listen to David.
You have an organization now.
The mob.
How do you evaluate material? Based on the research and the recommendations, or on gut instinct, or what?
You know, so many times someone in my office will read something and talk to me about a writer being hot. And I will say, who cares? Hot doesn't mean good. It might mean, here's the thing, when I was starting out, just to sell a project was everything. Now, you need to get the movie made. And so much of what you spend your time on, even if you're making the right choices, doesn't happen because the odds are against you, particularly in movies and in television too. So what I try to do is ask myself, and it becomes harder and harder because many of the movies that are being made now and are being successful are not particularly interesting to me personally. It's not that I don't enjoy seeing them, but you know, I'm not a big comic book guy. I've never made any superhero movies, I don't think. Not that I can remember. And the idea of you know, making a Slinky movie just doesn't appeal to me. And I think there is I don't know if there's a Slinky movie in development, but there is a Viewmaster movie. You know that thing that, yeah, so these things don't particularly appeal to me. I respond to the material, and my approach is generally not how do I find what people want, but what can I find that I want and then make them take it. Now, that's not necessarily the most practical way to approach things, and it certainly was not the way I approached things at the beginning of my career, but I very quickly found that I'm a good salesman when I believe in something, but if I don't, I'm rotten. I have to believe in what I'm selling. I have to be able to go in and say why I believe in this film or this television show. What is it about it that's special to me? Because, you know, generically it doesn't make any difference. So I really try and listen to the people that I work with. I will say that as I get older and more sort of involved in so many things which require more of my time than I would like, because what I most enjoy is sitting in a room with a writer and working on story, I look to my young executives who frankly have a better sense, particularly on the movie side, of what audiences are interested in. And because it's a joy for me to work with those people and say, well, this may not be my thing, but if you love this, I can help you make the best version of that thing. I mean, I think that's one of the joys of having done this for a long time, is that you learn your craft. I think of myself as a plumber. I know how to make the pipes go together. I know how to do the work that will get the water from here to here and fix the pipes. It doesn't matter whether it's a skyscraper or a little building or a one-room apartment. As a storyteller, you have to have a good beginning, middle, and end. You have to have good characters. So even if it's not a genre that I'm particularly in love with, if the people in my office are passionate about something for good reason, as opposed to just, oh, you know, maybe we can sell this, which I'm not interested in, I'm excited to be able to help them do it. So it's not necessarily just about my passion, but it's helping them make their passion come true, too.
Thank you. As you can tell, I'm slightly older than my friend on the left. And I grew up in the business when business was done a certain way, and people today find it hard to believe. But there was a time in the 60s and 70s when at a movie company you could make a deal, shake a hand, and the picture would be finished before papers were signed, because people literally trusted each other. What's it like today?
Different. You know, I think that we live in a scarier world. Maybe we didn't have to duck and cover when people talked about, you know, an atom bomb dropping on our heads and people were living with bomb shelters out in the suburbs. You lived in New York, so you probably had to go into the subway for your retreat. But I think that people are scared. You look at the world, it's as producers, to enter in the business today is terrifying. It was hard enough when I was doing it. I think that it's harder now, and interestingly enough, there's more there are more places that you can deliver content to, or there's the, you know, we had what, 3 television channels, and there was no cable really when I got started, and certainly not when you were starting out, David. You know, but there are fewer movies being made, and there's less of a system that exists to get your films made. And yes, there's the internet, and yes, there's independent films, which there were less of when I was starting out, and when David was working and starting out in the studio system. Everybody's afraid, and I think what happens is that with fear comes dishonesty. People will do what they have to do, and I don't know what you folks out there are feeling, but I feel like it's just, your word is not your bond the way it used to be. I have a quick story. That was on the phone with an agent trying to buy his house, and I was going through brokers, and I just called him directly after we had put in our last bid on this house and said, look, I'll give you this. Do we have a deal? He said, yes. And I said many, many times, do we have a deal? Do we have a deal? Do we have a deal? Yes. This is a true story. The agent, I spoke to someone who was representing me on the house, and they said, well, they just got another offer for $100,000 more than you. And I said, it's going to be fine. I have a deal. And he laughed. And I called up the agent, and I said, hey, I heard you got another offer, but we have a deal, right? And he goes, well, and he's hemming and hawing. And I said, let me ask you something. are you the biggest piece of shit lying mother? Anyway, just went off on this guy, or are you a man of your word? And he answered me with the following: I'll call you back. I got the house for the number that I had, but that is a wonderful example of, he had to think about it. Are you an honorable, decent guy, or are you a piece of shit? I don't know. I will call you back. And that is the state of our business on some level.
Okay. One of the things that I take most pride of in my life are the younger people that I met along the way, who I encouraged in any way I could. Could you tell us about some of the people that you've encouraged?
I will. I spend a lot of time at the office, as we all do. We all work really hard and try not to destroy the rest of our lives, which is hard sometimes, which is why we have so many divorces, and it's just an ugly business. However, we're all here because we love it, and we can't do anything else, because if we could, it would be better if we did, for everyone. However, not to be discouraging, but listen, it's hard, right? And you give up a lot, and you sacrifice a lot, because the competition is so great that you have to decide that you will get what you want or bust. And busting doesn't necessarily mean death, but it could mean busting everything else in your life. So it's hard. And most of us have made that choice, that we're going to do everything that we can to get what we want. I look at the people in my office as a family, and am also very proud of where these people have gone to. Many of our people start out as interns. They go from interns to assistants. They go from assistants to executives, and they will either stay with us because they continue to have opportunity, or we will help them find another job. We have interns who are now executives at studios, executives at television companies, producing on their own. One of the things that I enjoy most these days about what I do is going to the office to be with the people that work there. So for me, I have this kind of expression: geniuses do not apply. And what I mean by that is, I don't care how smart you are, I don't care how aggressive you are, if you're not somebody that I can spend 10 hours a day with, 12 hours a day, I don't want you in the office. This is my family. These are the people that I spend more time with than my wife and my children. And no matter how talented someone is, it's not worth it to me. And I'm very proud of the fact that we have at our place wonderful human beings who are passionate about what they do, who have either been with us for many years, or who have gone on to be successful in their own right. And it's like being able to help them develop a piece of material. There are plenty of movies that we've made over the last few years where I would read the first draft and go, I don't get it. And I was wrong sometimes, not always. But the point is that that is a great pleasure for me, and I think the same way for you, David, that as you get older, the idea of mentoring, if you will, people who you work with, is a very wonderful thing, and it makes you feel as good as anything else.
I certainly second that. I mean, I got a kiss and a hug from Bonnie. Are you here, or did you leave? She may have left. From Bonnie Arnold, who was a production coordinator in Atlanta and who I brought to California.
Could you talk about a few of the people in our industry who have started out
Sure.
working for you? This is like a rogues gallery of fabulousness. Some of them rogue and some of them fabulous.
Yeah. In no particular order. In 1969, John Lindsay decided to make an independent run for the mayor of New York. And he had a team that were helping him. And included in the team was an 18-year-old gopher nicknamed Squirt. And I worked on the campaign, and John Lindsay got elected. And I subsequently married his ex-girlfriend for a year or so. And and one day, Squirt called, and he said, "I'd really like to go in the movie business." And I said, "Okay, come on in, we'll talk." And I really liked him. And I had just been agreed to go back to Paramount and run the company for a while. You only run a company for a while these days. And I said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll do for you what, in effect, my father did for me." The summers when my grandfather actually was in the movie business. He opened a Nickelodeon in the Bronx in 1912. But my dad worked for Lowe's Theaters for many years. And during my summer years in my college days, each summer I worked in a different summer job. Once in a distribution office, the Universal office, the sales office in New York. Once in the marketing office as a summer intern for United Artists. And just as an aside, I have to tell you this because it's like one of my favorite little stories. We were opening a movie called High Noon with Gary Cooper. And they said to me, "Would you go pick up the young actress in this movie and take her to a photo shoot?" And I said, "Sure." I didn't even know what her name was, and I picked her up and I took her to this photo shoot. She introduced herself. She was very nice. And the Daily News was doing a cover story. And took her back to the rented apartment she was living in. And she kissed me on the cheek. And she said, "Thank you so much." And it was Grace Kelly. So that was that summer. So I did all these different, I did all these summer things.
Very sad
And I
for
met
you.
Squirt, and I said, "Okay, Squirt, you're going to come to work for me at Paramount, and I'm going to do a version of what my dad did for me. I'm going to put you for 3 months in production. I'm going to put you for 3 months in distribution. I'm going to put you for 3 months in marketing, and when we're finished, assuming I'm still here, we'll figure out what to do." I did all that, made him my assistant for a few months, and my contract came to an end, and Barry Diller and I, who actually liked each other very much, absolutely agreed that there was no way the two of us should work together. And I said, "I have a gift for you." He said, "What's that?" Well, I said, Charlie Bludon, who was Barry's boss, had saying, I'll try and do his accent. I apologize in front. "You got to make Star Trek." And I didn't want to make Star Trek because I didn't like science fiction movies, and Barry hadn't paid any attention. I said to Barry, "You give Squirt Star Trek, and I promise you'll have a movie in a year and a half." And he gave Squirt Star Trek, and Squirt changed his name to Jeffrey Katzenberg. Jeffrey Katzenberg, Larry Mark, was a PA for me on 3 movies. I brought him with me to California. I love Larry Mark with all my heart. I've been lucky enough to be in a position to help people just like you do. And it's certainly, I'm sure, one of the prides, this is not about me, the prides of our career that we could do this.
It's a joy.
Okay, so let's keep going with this gentleman. Tell me of the talent you have to work with and how you deal with them, the easy ones and the tough ones.
Well, to the easy ones you say yes, and to the tough ones you say yes, and that's the end of that. Our job as producers is to get the job done in the best way that we can. And that means when everything else is swirling around us and everyone is crazy, we can't be crazy with them. We're not allowed to be hurt. We're not allowed to be vulnerable. We're not allowed to cry. We have to be mommy and daddy and all those things to everybody that we work with because we're supposed to be the grown-ups. I'm really sick of being the grown-up. But whether it's writers, whether it's there's a writer that I've worked with, Bob Rodat. We did Saving Private Ryan together. We did The Patriot together. I'm working on a new project with him now. We had him working for a little while on this movie that I made, 10,000 BC. We brought him out, and he locked himself in his hotel room, and he was supposed to be writing. I don't know what the hell he was doing in there, but he wouldn't come out, and you would have to send paper over for his printer, and you'd have to leave it there. We'd have an assistant drop off the paper, and then he would come out when the person was gone. he's a little nutty. And finally, I'm like, Bob, what the hell are you doing? Who is this? I said, it's Nixon. Is this Liddy? I mean, people are crazy. I mean, all these people that are wildly talented are children. And I think what you have to do is you have to look at each circumstance, each individual situation, and say, how am I going to get the best out of this person? It's hard sometimes because they drive you crazy, and everything that they're doing, whether they're writers, actors, directors, you believe are antithetical to the best result to get what you want. And at the same time, you also have to stop and you have to say, well, but maybe they have a point, or maybe they're right. So you're always asking yourself and challenging yourself to, at some point, either shut them down, stop them, do it differently, they're crazy, but not to say to yourself, well, they're crazy, but also to say they might be right. So it's a really hard thing as being the grown-up. And yes, David, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, I was having lunch with Gary Lucchese and David Field, and we were talking about the crazies. And they said, well, give me a crazy story. So I'll give you the short crazy story because it's absolutely crazy. We made a movie with Peter Sellers, who was crazy, called The World of Henry Orient in New York. And it's 2:30 in the morning, the phone rings. It's Jerry Hellman, the producer. I said, what's wrong? He says, we got a problem. I says, 2:30 in the morning. He says, yeah, but I got to deal with it now. I said, okay, what is it? He says, Peter and his entourage are staying at the Regency Hotel. And he called, and there are poltergeists there, and he has to move now. So I got him suites in the Waldorf Astoria. I said, fine. I said, can I go to sleep? Why are you calling me? He says, it's twice as expensive. I said, I don't care. Let me go to sleep. I mean, poltergeists in the room.
My mother, who passed away a few years ago, our housekeeper said she was hanging around my house. So, you know, maybe it was true. And let me tell you about my mother.
Okay, here's an easy question. What's the future look like to you?
The south of France. You know, I don't know what the future looks like. What I hear is that as we get closer and closer to movies being on our bigger and bigger screens at home, and the internet connecting to our TV in ways that don't quite work yet, and all of these things come together, that on the movie side, we will be having releases where we release on all platforms all over the world simultaneously, so that my kids don't want to go to the movie theater. They'd rather watch it on their iPad or their computer. They don't. My youngest daughter says, I don't want to go to the movie theater, it's gross. You know, and I take her to nice theaters. I don't understand what the problem is. But she doesn't know from gross. The way most of us do.
No, you know from gross.
But you know, I think that it's true. People want to be able to say on Monday, I saw that TV show, I saw that movie, the whole water cooler, you know, culture that we live in. You want to be able to discuss what's going on, and movies are still a big deal. Television's a big deal. So I believe that instead of having, you know, $200 million blockbuster weekends or $250 or $300 million blockbuster weekends, that we will eventually have movies released on DVD, in your house, pay-per-view, on the internet, in the theater, on your phone, wherever you can get it, you'll watch it at the same time. And the good news for most of us is that it doesn't really matter. We're storytellers, so we're going to tell our stories on a big screen, on a small screen, on a telephone, on a computer screen. Good drama hasn't changed in, you know, hundreds if not thousands of years. And if you have a great story to tell and you figure out a way to tell it well, people are going to watch it on whatever screen and whatever size they have to watch it on. So for me, I don't ever worry about these things because I'm a plumber. I know how to fix the pipes.
I'm going to get a little sentimental, but I'm allowed to at my age. I've worked with a lot of people in this business, a lot. I've worked with the best and the worst. This is the best.
Oh, thank you, David. Thank you.
I think we could go on, but this is a gentleman who should answer your questions. So what I'd like to do is start the question process, because sometimes you ask Mark Gordon a question and that will fill up the time for the next session. So let's open it up right away. Are we using microphones or standing up and talking? I can't hear.
Hey, two-part question. Back to Speed for a second. So you read a script that has a great beginning and needs some work. Did you develop that on your own before you sold it to Paramount? And the second question is, what's the ratio of scripts that come through your company that you end up then eventually going out with?
We didn't develop it. We sold it and then went through the development process. And I don't know what the number is. Hundreds and hundreds to one. Just because most of the stuff we get isn't that interesting to me, and I don't think most of it's that interesting to anyone. So, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to find stuff that you love and that's good, and once in a while you get lucky.
Richard Harder. Thank you for your comments on integrity. I really appreciated that.
I made it up.
Thank you. You spoke about mentors, and I'm just curious if you had mentors and who they were and how they affected you, and if you could talk about that.
You know, I always wanted to have a real mentor in the way that people do, where they, you know, Jeffrey Katzenberg worked for you. I have a lot of friends who work for producers or executives. I started out as a producer at a very young age, and so I didn't really have the opportunity to work for someone or to be engaged with someone. I wish I had. It just didn't turn out that way. I think more to the point, I looked at people in the industry, whether I knew them or not, and mostly I didn't, and watched how they worked, read how they worked, talked to other people to see about how they worked, and looked at the movies that they made and the reasons that they made them. So, you know, there were producers. You mentioned Jerry Hellman. You know, he made Midnight Cowboy. He made yes, and Coming Home, and he made a handful of movies. He didn't make a lot of films as a producer, but he made some great ones. I admire people who choose to do great work, and that's the most important thing to them. So I would say that you know, I can look around and say, you know, Frank Capra was a hero of mine. I never met the man. Jerry Hellman is a producer. Sam Spiegel, who was probably one of the most crooked human beings in our industry, but boy, did he make some great films. Alexander Korda. You know, there's just been so many great people who looked at the industry. There's a story, I don't know whether it's true or not, but Irving Thalberg, who the building over there is named for, who died at 39 and was the production head of MGM for many, many years, and one of the youngest production heads. I think at 20 he became the head of production at Universal. He used to make some movies knowing that he wasn't going to make any money on it, knowing that the company wasn't going to make any money on it, because the movie industry and his company in particular, MGM, was making so much money on films that he believed that they had a responsibility to make films that weren't necessarily going to make money. I have the good fortune to be able to make money doing certain kinds of film and television, so we make movies where we know we will literally not make $1. So we made interestingly enough, on the same day that our film 2012 came out, we also had a movie come out called The Messenger. I didn't make a nickel. I made $1 on that movie, and I didn't expect to make any money, but I wanted to make I certainly wanted the people who made it to get their money back, but I didn't really care about me, and I'm lucky that I didn't have to. So I think that you fall in love with things and you make them because you need to, you want to, you have to, and if you're lucky enough, you don't always have to make money on them.
I could amplify that a little bit. We go to the next.
Hello?
Having been in a position at one point to greenlight movies, I never, ever looked at a project on the basis of how much money I can make with it, because I had no idea. I looked at it as how much was I prepared to lose, and was I prepared to take that risk on the presumption that it was not going to be successful. And
one of those movies was the first Beatles film. David made
Hard Day's Night.
Hard Day's Night.
Well, we were lucky enough to sign the Beatles when they were unknown, so before they were become popular. But it was a different world. I'll give you just a little tiny example. I was made head of production when I was 30 at United Artists. The partner who I had been an assistant to decided to leave, and I got his job. And I recommended a film, a script I had just read, and I had just flown to London to meet on. And I called my bosses, Arthur Krim and Bob Benjamin in New York, and I said, I think we really have to make this film. It's $1 million. And they said, well, if you believe that strongly, okay, but make a 2-picture deal, cross-collateralized in case one picture flops and there's something to protect it there. And they literally, thank you, they literally said, give me a green light to make the movie. So I did. The movie turned out to be successful. It's the first picture I greenlit. It won the Oscar. It was called Tom Jones. And I subsequently found out that they had read the script and hadn't particularly liked it, but they felt it was very important for me to feel that I could recommend something and that they would go with that recommendation occasionally, and they wanted to go with the first thing that I recommended.
Not anymore.
So it is truly a very, very different world. Okay, sorry. Back to the audience.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for doing this. I can't tell you what it means. My name's Rob. Mark, this question's for you. It was really helpful when you were talking about the nuts and bolts about how to get a film going. In this marketplace today, given that you started in films and now you've moved into television, it might take a little bit, but could you give us a nuts and bolts example of what it means to go sell television to the networks and to cable and stuff? And also, if you can think to how to put it into words, talk about specifically selling, because you said you're good when you believe in it, and I'd like you to elaborate on that if you don't mind. Thank you.
You know, it's easy. It's relatively easy for me at this point to sell a television show because I've sold so many, and some of them have been successful, so I get a pass. But it's all. I really believe that. I mean, it's true in anything, but I'm a believer that you go with the writer. That if if a writer has a story that they want to tell, if a writer has something that they really believe in, and I'm excited about it, that's what I go for, because most things that you try and create, I mean, the Monkees were a band that were created. They were okay, but the Monkees were never anything other than the Monkees, and they weren't the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all the things that they were trying to compete with. I have ideas, but somehow what I find, particularly in television, is that if a writer has a passion for something and a story that they want to tell, there's a better chance that that will be successful than if I or the people in our company invent it, create it, kind of put it together. Hey, everybody wants to see, blah, blah, blah. So I really kind of pick writers and say, I want to be in business with you, in the same way that I hope that the networks will pick me to produce things for, because I believe in it.
It's very interesting because in my career, I'm a sucker for writers. My best friends have always turned out to be, with one exception, writers. There's something that you obviously and I respond to in them, and having worked with so many, I just enjoy the experience. It's
You know what some people will say is the definition of a producer? Friend of writer. So, not a bad thing. And the second part of your question? Look, it's pretty much the same as it always has been. Do they get excited about it? They're going to buy, each network is going to buy 80 drama pilot scripts a year, 70, 60, 50, whatever it is, and however many comedies they buy. There's hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of scripts that are developed every year. And, they're looking for a medical show, and they're looking for a cop show, and they're looking for this, and they're looking for that. They're looking for the big idea. And each network has a brand. I don't know what NBC's brand is, but they're trying to figure it out. And by the way, they'll probably figure it out, and it'll be great, because Bob Greenblatt's a really smart, clever guy. But you can look at CBS, and you can look at Fox, and you can look at ABC, and you kind of know what they like. So you try and create things that you're excited about, that you think will fit into their schedule, into their brand. Be prepared. Do your job. Be a good salesman. And being a good salesman isn't necessarily being slick. It's being thorough. It's being, I have writers come in and I will make them redo the pitch 10 times. I don't go in with any kind of a casual attitude and think they should buy it because I'm selling it. And I've always been that way, and I drive people crazy sometimes because I will say, not ready, not ready, not ready. But, you only get one shot, so you better be over-prepared than the other way around.
Hi, my name's Brooks. So I'm wondering a little bit more about the genesis of Saving Private Ryan, how you decided Saving Private Ryan, and how you decided to work on that, and
Yeah,
it sounded like you had more of a story there.
I had read a script by Bob Rodat, which I really liked. I thought he was a wonderful writer. And as I still continue to do, I had coffee with him, and I said, listen, the best way for us to find something to do together is for you to come to my office once a week for an hour and pitch me stuff, and I'll pitch you stuff, and let's just meet 1 hour every week until we come up with something that we're both really excited about. So the first few hours were about him pulling out every piece of crap he ever thought about selling, and me pulling out every piece of crap that I ever thought about selling. I was like, well, there's nothing here. And I think it was like the third time that he came over. He said, I read this thing, and it's about these, brothers, and 2 of them were killed in the Pacific on the same day, and 1 of them died on the beaches of Normandy, and then there was a 4th brother, and blah, 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 the story that you know. And I was mesmerized. I couldn't believe it. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever heard. And he said, do you think we can sell it? And I said, I don't know how we can't. And we went to every studio in town, and they passed. We couldn't sell it. We couldn't sell it anywhere. Finally, on a second go-round, I got Paramount to buy it. And that's how it happened. It was, I find that if you can get in a room with a writer who you want to work with once, maybe twice, 3 times, you're going to come up with something that excites you both. And it doesn't matter what it is, and as long as you don't have a preconceived idea of what you want from this person, or they don't have a preconceived idea necessarily of what they must do, and if they do, great, but you just that's the joy, sitting in a room and talking about stories and ideas and things that interest you, and so that's how that happened. And I've this was the first time I had tried that. As you know, we do everything we can to come up with something to sell to somebody, and that's been a good, effective way for me to put things together.
Hi. This may be on the, I don't know if you would call integrity a continuity or the flip side of integrity. Have you been in a position where you feel that your story is so creatively compromised that it's time to give it up, that you need to abandon a project, that creative differences?
Abandon a project You mean somebody's already in the process of paying for it and you're going to abandon it?
Where you're developing something. I mean, I think when someone's paid for it, then you're committed. But if you're developing something and you say,
I think,
this is
listen,
not
I think
coming
like
together.
anything else, if you feel that you've gone as far down the road as you can with a writer or someone else, and you're just not feeling that you're going to get there, it's okay to let it go. I think that there's only but so many hours in the day, and we are in the triage business if we're lucky. And you only have but so much time to devote to any one thing, and as we know, we got to have at least a few balls in the air, because it's too hard to just work on one thing and that's the only thing, and you have your whole life invested in that one thing, because maybe it won't happen. So I think part of trying to make things happen is to at least have a few things that you're thinking about. One of the things that I enjoy about producing is that it serves my ADD, and I found a way to be able to come in and out and touch this, and it's hard, because I was used to working on one movie at a time, one thing at a time, not so much in development, but when I was making it, and now we have 7 or 8 things going at one time, and I don't have the time to be on the set all day doing that thing, which is a blessing and a curse, because on one level it's what I enjoy the most, but you become a victim of your own success, which is a great thing. But I think that sometimes you just have to say, put it away, or give it to somebody else, or let somebody else have it because they have a better sense of what's going on than you do. And as we know, projects start, you have to try and decide what's fair about who should get the goods when they're not finished yet, and let them have it. The great thing is that, particularly, I think so many of us become friends with the people we work with, and we work with our friends. And I've always looked at, there's an old expression in Hollywood, which is unfortunately true to some extent. It's not enough for me to be successful. My friends have to fail. I look at it as what's good for my friends is good for me, because as you're working together and you're coming up, you may put a hand out to someone and be able to hire them or help them or do something for them, and they will do the same for you. So I think you have to look and say, how can I take the high road as much as I possibly can, and let something go when it's not working, and let the other person have it possibly.
Last question, or 2 more, right here and then in the front.
Yes, both of you mentioned Irving Thalberg earlier. He was a genius at picking hits, except in his day it took maybe 6 months or less to get a movie from green light to screen to release. So he could make more topical movies and more on the pulse of what the public was interested in. Do you feel he would be just as big a genius, or make just as many hits today, given the climate where it takes 3 years from green light to release?
Maybe he'd be Steve Jobs. I mean, interestingly enough, who knows? There are so many. There's so many other avenues for people who tell stories. I mean, if you look at Pixar, which Steve Jobs kind of rescued, this is a trying business, and I think that I never knew the man, obviously, but he clearly had a talent for, doing great work. Also, like all geniuses, they don't stay geniuses forever, And so I don't know the answer to the question, other than the fact that there are certainly a lot of opportunities for people to do great things, and it changes. So maybe he wouldn't have been in the movie business. Maybe he would have been, in Silicon Valley creating something or shepherding something. Or
Last question.
Hi, I'm Hanif Bhatti, and
This better be good, okay? It's the last one.
Oh God, goodbye.
They're gonna come and grab you if it's not a good question.
If you don't like it, we'll squeeze one more in.
You talked about. I want my money
Next.
back. I want my money back now. You talked about recognizing when those talented, crazy people are right. Of course, that's not something that happens overnight. You must have made a lot of mistakes in order to realize, oops, And could you tell us those stories where you said, oh my God, that person was right and I didn't listen to him? In the world where everybody wants to be right.
You know, I try to start out any project with the assumption and the sort of the desire to believe that if I've chosen to work with them, that there is just as good a chance that they could be right as I am about anything. So I don't, as a producer, there are lots of different ways of producing. When you talk about Jerry Bruckheimer, you generally don't think about the directors. You think about him. He makes a certain kind of movie, and he's been wildly successful at it. And though you may not think of Jerry Bruckheimer as David Selznick, he's probably the closest producer to David Selznick working, because he is the author of his films more than anyone else. I generally, I look at the films that I've made over the years, and they're so different. You know, The Hoax, which is a movie that I'm very proud of, is very different than The Day After Tomorrow, and Saving Private Ryan is different from, I don't know, Source Code. I mean, there's just, you know, all different. And I was involved in financing movies, and Simple Plan is a film that I financed, and we also financed Wonder Boys. They couldn't be more different. So my approach is to really collaborate. And as far as, you know, someone else being right and me being wrong, or someone else, I'm trying to think of a specific incident. I would say that on everything I've ever done, there have been instincts that I've had that have been wrong. And I think that we're really lucky now with the technology that we have. I'm not sure in the end we're getting better films, but with the Avid and the ability to look at things different ways, you really get an opportunity to try things in ways that you didn't get to do when we were cutting on film. Now, I also think that because we're moving so fast and we don't have as much time to think about things, and it used to be that every time you made a cut, because it was going through that you know, cam or whatever, you know, moviola, and every time there was a cut, if you kept cutting a frame, you'd end up with a bunch of splices, and you'd lose your mind trying to watch that scene because it was chopped to bits. So what people would do is that they would be very careful about where they chose to make a cut, because you're not going to get a new work print every other day. And it's hard to watch the film when there's splice marks and it throws off your rhythm and everything else. I know that's not your question, but I'm answering. I'm going to just talk about what I want to talk about. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I make mistakes all the time. When we made The Messenger, I fought aggressively with the writer-director. I had final cut, which I kind of have never exercised in that way of, you know, no, you have to do it my way, especially on a small movie where there's a writer-director. I want to honor that because it's his vision more than mine in that respect, even though it was originally an idea of ours that we handed the writer-director. And we fought a lot, healthily fighting. There was a scene in that movie where there was no coverage. I used to fight with him all the time when we were shooting. You're not getting coverage. You're not getting coverage. What are we going to do when there's a problem? There was a scene in a kitchen that was like 8 minutes long, and we never cut. And I was going crazy. What if the scene doesn't work? What if you know? And you know, we talked about it a lot. And should we cut it down? And should we cut it short because we couldn't cut in the middle of it? And you know, there were in the end, I couldn't cut the scene, and I felt that it was too long. But I think in the end it worked. Just finished a movie called The Details. The director was stuck, and the movie was clearly too long and wrong too. And he allowed me, again, I had final cut. I went into the editing room, And in one day, I took 20 minutes out of the film. Sloppy, but took it out. And he saw it and said, you know, it's great. I want to put back this and this and this. I said, put back anything you want. I'm giving you, I said, I'll trade you Final Cut for a weekend in the editing room without me. Not because he wasn't great, but because he couldn't see it anymore. And so I wasn't going to ever make him do anything because it was a $4 million movie that he wrote and directed. He graciously said, yes, go in, because I couldn't work with him looking over my shoulder. He would have driven me crazy. And it was his editor. And we cut the film down, and he put a few minutes back in. But, you know, I'm wrong all the time. I just have to be smart enough to not have to be right, which is kind of the key in what we do every day. That was a good question.
How many of you are in the movie business? Okay, put your hands down. How many of you want to be and are not? Okay.
Run away.
You've been witness to a very special time with this man. I thank you, and have a good trip.
Thank you very much.